So thoughts come. They're not created by your conscious attention. Your conscious attention notices and gives importance to and or belief to thoughts.
Get up, everybody move.
What's going on, everybody? Soul Expression here, your host, your freedom lifestyle coach, and I'm very happy to be with you on today's episode of Get Your Mind Right. Now, today's episode, we're going to dive back into the question, answering the question, so what exactly is the mind? What do you mean get your mind right by the word mind? Well, the mini-series, What Exactly is the Mind, where at first, the first three parts, I answered the question, where do thoughts come from? Because thought is how we experience what the mind does. We experience it in various thought forms, right? And in this video, I'm going to talk about what exactly is, I'm just going to answer the question, what exactly is the mind? Now, this is part 2 of what exactly is the mind. And so, we're going to I'll put a link in the description for the rest of the whole playlist, Get Your Mind Right, and you'll be able to see part 1, part 2 of the different factions of this grandiose question here. What exactly is the mind? So we already went over where do thoughts come from. And in the first part of what exactly is the mind, I asked you some questions and got your brain, going a little bit. I said, why can we experience what the mind does, but we can't see it? Right? Why can we experience thoughts and interpretations of emotions, like we know what emotions we're having because we can interpret them. We can interpret the receiving of other people's emotions and other people's thoughts even, and all of these things. We can experience what the mind does, but we can't see it, right? And why do we think that we can use the mind to see it? Why do we think that we can think our way out of thinking to see where the thinking happens? And I said it's like trying to use a telescope to see the telescope. Can you see what I'm saying here? You can't do it. It's like using a knife to cut the knife, or using the tip of the finger to touch the tip of the finger. Can't do it. It's impossible. And I asked you some questions like that, and then we got into a brief discussion on, some things that don't even have a brain use the mind, make choices, and live out a full life where they gain energy, they lose energy, if they heal, if they're injured, and all of these things, yet they have no brain, like some single-celled organisms and stuff like that, but they're using the power of the mind. And I told you what doctors would call the mind, and I told you why I think that that's an incomplete viewpoint or take on what the mind is. And the last thing I said was, remember how we all got here with the statement, let there be light, and light not being a descriptor, right? I said, it wasn't said, let there be something bright and that can shape itself into a whole bunch of things that I want to create. No, it said, let there be light, right? Let there be this thing that I already know what it is. Well, that knowing what it is existed in the mind of the all, or the mind of the source of creation, before it made its way into the physical existence that we all take part in. So, just a little recap so we can get readjusted, and let's go ahead and dive in to part 2 of what exactly is the mind. Let's answer that question. What exactly is the mind? Very happy. So check this out. Attention, belief, identity, judgment, interpretation, representation, contrast, pleasure, pain, emotion, and thinking. These are all things that we can sense with the mind. But none of these things can define what the mind is, as they happen within the mind, within the bubble of the mind, and are therefore inferior to the whole of it. And speaking of thinking, if all you're doing is reacting then you never think for yourself. As I said in an earlier video, it's like thought happens to you, but you don't really have control over it. And so if those thoughts happen to be negative, then you won't be able, first of all, you won't even notice that you're being, unless someone brings it to your attention, you won't even notice that you're going into a dark place. But then also, you might not feel that there's any way out. You might feel like you have to ride this wave of just negativity until it finally falls away by itself, when in truth, you have all the power to be free of negativity. And so if you're always reacting, then you don't think for yourself. The fact is, since you have not practiced, right, if you're always reacting, the fact is, since you've not practiced becoming familiar with exercising your imagination, okay, all the thoughts that ever come to you are from someone else's mind and personality. Make sense? If all you're doing is reacting, right? And we already know from just observing ourselves growing up that our reactions come from other people and like other animals. Those the protective reactions, the way we protect ourselves, the way we protect a loved one, the way that we stand up for ourselves, because some reactions are good and necessary. So the way that we stand up for ourselves and the way that we run away from things, all of these reactions, right, and more, are learned from other people. We know that they come from outside sources, from external stimuli, okay? But if you don't practice stimulating your own internal environment, your great and wonderful imagination, which is the power that is the conductor of your surroundings, of your surrounding environment, you don't practice exercising your imagination, then every thought whatsoever you experience in your life until you change this comes from somewhere else, someone else's mind, someone else's personality. So knowing that, you can live basically your whole life with all external thoughts and no thoughts of your own, except for when you were a young child. Knowing that you can do that, then you can see that there's a definite connectivity, a indefinite way that all minds are connected. And the way that I like to put it is, I say there is but one mind in the entire existence, and we are different expressions of that one mind. That's why we have polar opposites, but then when you look at polar opposites right next to each other, they're like the front and back of a coin, or the north and south of a magnet. They're definitely different, but they're also like seemingly a part of the same thing, like the bees and the flowers, right? Without flowers, there'd be no bees. Without bees, there'd be no flowers. They're this one organism that are totally different, yet also a part of the same thing, the same system, you could say, the same, the same thing, It's kind of how it goes. So there's one mind in the entire existence. Now, what is it? Well, I say here, the mind is like a doorway. On one side of the door is the entirety of life itself. On the other side of the door is your perception. Now, you can sense the doorway, but you cannot see it, for it lies on the event horizon of all perception. So, the mind is the doorway on the event horizon of all perception. Obviously, we have a subconscious aspect of ourself, or a subconscious mind, and subconscious means beyond conscious, right? Under or beyond consciousness. So where the thoughts that are received from a dimension outside of your own mind, your conscious mind, comes through like this doorway, this formless veil, curtain, it appears from nothing into somethingness in the form of thought, in a thought form. And it came through like this doorway. So you can sense the doorway, okay? And I repeat in certain kind of ways just to make sure that you're able to follow me, because I can't see your facial expression as I'm recording this and see if you're actually following or not. So if you get it and I keep explaining it, please just bear with me as I'm trying to make sure everyone can explain it. Okay, can understand it. Excuse me. So anyway, on one side of the door is your perception, right? Everything you can notice, the things that you give importance to, the things that you judge, the things that you have belief and or identity attached to, that give you pleasure and pain. All of these things that you can sense, that you experience, is on one side of the doorway, like you could say the inside. And then on the outside of the doorway, there's the subconscious, right? And what we call your mind, right, as the one that's seemingly separate from the rest of the mind, or your personal expression of the mind, okay, is that doorway that you can sense. It's like a doorway. So let's dive a little bit deeper here, if you don't mind. Pun intended. Had to say it. To understand what the mind is, you must go on a journey to understand what the self is. Whoa. To understand what the mind is, you must, that means you shall, if you are to understand what the mind is, you shall go on the journey to understand what the self is. Now, the self is not the mind. You see, because the self can exist without the mind, yet the mind cannot exist without the self. And how do we know this? We know this through when you're knocked out, when you're dead sleep, or what's called deep sleep, where you're not dreaming, but you are asleep, right? And so there's no waking consciousness. There's no natural feeling of I am. There's no interpretation of anything. There's no colors, there's no shapes, there's no feelings of touch, there's no tastes, there's no 5 bodily senses, and there's no millions of internal senses. There's nothing in deep sleep. And you're not dreaming either. You're not experiencing the thought version of your 5 senses either. You're nothing. Okay? There's no mind in deep sleep, yet there is the self. You are still here. Something is keeping your breathing going. Something is keeping your heart from stopping. And it's not purely electricity. Something is on purpose keeping your life story going, which you can call the self. But it's not your mind that's doing that. And it is until the self brings back that feeling I am, whether it's in dream or in waking consciousness, because in both dream and waking consciousness you have the natural feeling I am, which is the first knowledge of any experience whatsoever, is the feeling I am. Okay? That feeling must be put into one's consciousness, okay, and sprouted from the self in order for mind to do its thing, in order for mind to start interpreting and start doing things. I am is the doorway through which mind comes. Okay? On the other side of I am, as a doorway, is the self. So you got the doorway of I amness, the seed of all knowledge, the seed of all knowing, the seed of all interpretation, perception whatsoever, including that sense of the whole of the mind. Okay? But then you also have the doorway of the mind, where on one side it's the invisible mind, the subconscious mind, and then on the other side it's the noticeable, perceivable aspects of your mind. All right? So you must go back a little further into a journey where you go to understand yourself, or the self, before you can go to understand the mind. And why is that? Because the mind is within the bubble of the self. Okay, so when you're in the greater self, you can see or sense. You can't see it as an image, but you can sense what the mind is and all of its functioning. But when you're within the mind, when you're totally identified with your thoughts only, and you're trying to consistently use the telescope to see the telescope, or use thoughts to see your mind, you won't be able to, like I said, you'll be trying to use fire to burn fire. Fire cannot burn itself, right? A knife cannot cut itself. Light cannot illumine itself. The tip of the finger cannot touch the tip of the finger. It's one thing. So the fact that the self is the source of the mind and is therefore greater than the mind is the reason that to see the mind clearly, one must abide in the self. And there are many different ways to abide in the self. The best or most direct. I say best because it's the most direct path to abiding in the self. It's called self-inquiry, and I can help with that. Or there's many videos on YouTube that you can find on self-inquiry that can help you when it comes to that type of stuff. And so this not only allows one clarity into the truth of the mind, but also the truth of the source. And yes, I am talking about God Almighty, the source of all creation, because the truth of the source is, first of all, it's not hidden from any being whatsoever. God's love is infinite. God's love is infinite, and it's not like it's some holy secret locked in some type of spiritual vault somewhere that only the special people get to access. No, this truth of the source is accessible to you. And when you are able to use a tool like self-inquiry to unlock and expand your consciousness of your mind, right? Expand, because consciousness is bigger than the mind, right? Consciousness is like a synonym for the self, but not even really, because the self is even bigger than consciousness. But words get a little tricky when you start to go beyond the mind, obviously, because the mind is here to interpret words and symbols. Words are symbols. So the mind is here to interpret symbols. So when you go beyond symbols and symbol interpretation, it gets hard to use symbols to try and explain. And man, it's just like that. But don't be discouraged. We can answer this question: what exactly is the mind? Now, I'm seeing that the video is getting kind of long, so I think I'll cut this short after this last little bit. Hang out with me for just a little bit more, and I'm going to give you this last little bit to think about, and hopefully it leaves you with a greater sense of what's possible for you. Okay? So I'll restate once again. Not only does self-inquiry and basically practicing going beyond the mind to abide in the self bring you clarity into the truth of the mind, but it also gives you clarity as to the truth of the source. Okay, the big source. Okay, last thing. There is but one mind in the whole universe, and this is why when one becomes free of the mind, it is he or she who can free others from their mind. This is also why telepathy, telekinesis, and mentalism and things of that nature are possible. The one mind is not separate from anything else. Therefore, I can use my mind to communicate and to manipulate and to move objects and all of these things. There's plenty of examples of real life telekinesis and telepathy right on YouTube that you can look up for yourself. I cannot prove to you in this video that all of them or even one of them is definitely real, but you'll be able to see for yourself that there's plenty of real examples out there. I just can't prove it to you with words. But anyway, that's why those things are possible, is because there's one mind. There's one field of mind, but your conscious attention and your conscious mind Okay, it's like your expression or the expression granted to you from the source that you can use in your life to shape your life however you want to live. Okay, now this means that what we call the mind is simply higher frequency signatures that are perceived by the all-pervading self, that silent observer of life itself. Okay, not your life, of life. That silent observer, the all-pervading self, the God consciousness, the Christ consciousness within, that is not wavering in connection or true love. Depending on what you do, it loves you regardless, whether you're an evil person or a very nice and just person. Okay, what we call the mind is simply higher vibratory, sensible frequency signatures that are received by yourself. Because what happens when you think? You think by becoming quiet, by becoming more like the source, which is silent observer, right? And then thoughts come. Even when you go to have a conversation, on the inside, when you're doing the listen, when you're having a conversation, it's listen and talk, right? Some people are better at it than others. But even those people, they're listening. They just might not be as good a listener as somebody else. But either way, during the listening part, on the inside of yourself, okay, even if you're listening while you're trying to talk, you're still quiet. You're still becoming quiet. And then thoughts come, and then you go to share them. So thoughts come. They're not created by your conscious attention. Your conscious attention notices and gives importance to and or belief to thoughts that show up on their own accord, okay, in the movie of your life. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this video here. And this has been What Really Is the Mind, Part 2. And I think, part 4 or 5 of of the entire series, What Exactly Is the Mind? And I can't wait to do the next section. The next section will be, where does environment come from? So we answered, where do thoughts come from? What exactly is the mind? And now we're going to get into, where does environment come from? Because your environment is shaped by your mind. There's nothing else that shapes your environment except your mind, meaning your conscious attention mind, and the collective mind, okay? But especially your mind. Your mind has the biggest shovel when it comes to shaping your mind. And so we're gonna get into that, and I can't wait. Once again, my name is Soul Expression. I've been your host during this wonderful web series, Get Your Mind Right. Hopefully today's video left you feeling inspired. Once again, I teach these types of things in my course called Mentalism Mechanics. If you would like to inquire into that, just hit me up. The links will be in the description to the Instagram and Facebook, where you can send a message. I will respond. This is a real thing. Peace and love to you, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video. So if you're new to Ufulu Child, make sure you subscribe to get more mind mastery content dropped straight into your YouTube feed. If you enjoyed today's episode of Get Your Mind Right, let me know by clicking that like button, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video. Peace and love.